Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Policy and Oversight Board. Thank you for those who are in attendance. My name is Councillor Lisa Homan and I chair the board. Before we start the meeting, there's just a couple of things I want to point out. This meeting is being live streamed to the council's YouTube channel. So by participating in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Should there be any fire alarms, please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion and please use the stairs. If you're unable to use the stairs, then please let an officer know who will give you assistance to get out of the building, and we need to assemble at the assembly point opposite Shortlands Road. And could I just ask officers that are reporting to us this evening, if you could just say your names and introduce yourself at the beginning of the report when I invite you to participate. So I think that is the kind of business that we just need to check through. So could I ask if there are any apologies for absence? I believe we've got
Councillor Rowan and Rebecca.
We've also got Councillor Rowan Ree, I believe. No other apologies for absence. Are there any declarations of interest? Are there any items on the agenda that Councillor Salute?
Thank you, Chair. The Crichton Centre is mentioned on the item for intergenerational activities. I am a trustee of the Crichton Centre, formerly known as Bishop Crichton House. A few other charities are mentioned which are funded by Hammersmith United Charities, of which I'm a trustee and member of the grants board. And then on the item on digital inclusion, Ready Take Go is mentioned a few times, and I've been and remain a founder and one of the directors of Ready Take Go.
Okay, I don't think any of those are pecuniary interests, so we'll note those. Councillor Salute. Councillor Perez.
Thank you, Chair. It's like my fellow councillor that just spoke. I'm also a member of Hammersmith United Charities Board of Trustees. I'm also part of the Grants Committee. Some of the charities mentioned in the report that are funded by HUCR are included there. I just wanted to know that for the purpose of transparency. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Chair. I have a non-pecuniary interest in the Urban Partnership Group, who are the Maspero Older People Access Service.
Okay, any other declarations of interest? No, thank you very much. Let's move to the next item on the agenda, which is the minutes of the last meeting. Are there any items that anybody would like to raise from the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 20th of June? Seems a real long time ago now. No. Okay. Could I just draw your attention to page 12 to 14, which are the actions from that meeting? And you will note that we have made progress on all of the actions, and except for item 8, which is still in progress, which is constantly moving, I think, in terms of electoral registration and voter ID. So I believe that there was a report circulated to us within days of the last meeting, and I believe that there is more work going on with that at the moment. So it may be something that we would like to revisit at some point, because I know there's all sorts of new evidence coming out about the new voter ID scheme. Anybody want to raise anything from the actions, or are you just happy to note those? Okay, thank you very much. That leads us to the first main item of the agenda, which is intergenerational practice in Hammersmith and Fulham. I'll invite officers to speak in a moment. I just want to say a few words of introduction to this report. Intergenerational practice was something that was in a manifesto commitment from the administration way a long time ago. We had COVID, which actually made kind of intergenerational interaction, I suppose, quite difficult. And so this is an issue which I have picked up and would like to make sure that we get a good strategy in place. I'm conscious that we don't have resources to throw at this matter, but I am absolutely confident in the little bit of work that I've done in my initial investigations that we could have a really good strategy in the borough by just looking at what's already here, how we improve it, how we work better, and how we actually get the best out of the resources that we've already got. So on that note, I'm going to invite Julius to introduce the report. And Julius, if you could say where you're from and your role. We've had quite a lot of input from adult social care on this report, and I've got members of the Youth Council who I met to talk to about intergenerational issues back in July. And I welcome you both to the meeting this evening, and I really hope that you'll have some comments to make when you've heard the officer's report and when you've heard the comments of the committee, so that we can hopefully include the things that you're working on in the Youth Council in our policy as we go forward. So over to you, Julius.
Thank you, Councillor. My name's Julius Olu. I'm the Assistant Director for Commissioning and Partnerships for Adult Social Care. I'd like to start actually by just mentioning that my colleagues in Children's would have liked to be here as well, but I think they've got a couple of Ofsted assurance meetings, as well as a number of key staff who are on leave. So that's why they can't be here. So what I'll do is I'll take us through the report, and then thankfully we've also got a colleague from the third sector with us as well, Jazz. So at some point I'll hand over to Jazz to talk through what we currently are doing in adult social care in relation to intergenerational practice. Thank you for acknowledging some of the challenges we do have as well, Councillor Holman, as well, in terms of funding, really, amongst many things. But one of the key things here is and the ask really from this report is that the board looks to discuss, but equally consider future opportunities. Now, there was some really in-depth work done by our Policy and Programme Management Office earlier this year, which you alluded to. And what that did is it defined or gave us a framework for what intergenerational practice is. But at the same time, that report focused on the benefits of intergenerational practice, and then gave us a bit of a framework to actually consider how that can support us here in Hammersmith and Fulham, particularly in combating isolation and loneliness. Some of the overarching benefits which the research highlights are things like improving social connectivity amongst residents, improving health and well-being, community cohesion, but it's not left us without the challenges that it will bring as well, in terms of having different age groups interact and the effects of that as well. I'll move on swiftly though to just some of the things we currently do in Hammersmith and Fulham, with a key focus on the third sector. We've got a very diverse third sector within Hammersmith and Fulham that meets a range of resident needs, but very importantly, the work that the third sector does cuts across council priorities. And within the report, I do highlight some of those key cross-cutting priorities: improving health for adult social care, everything we do delivering social inclusion, a stronger local economy with more jobs for local people, ensuring a safer, cleaner borough, providing the best start for young people, and empowering and enabling local communities. So that they're key cross-cutting priorities that all the work that the third sector does falls beneath, is underpinned by those things. I think we then go on actually to identify some of the third sector organisations that actually do this work already within their service level agreements. Just to name some of them there. We've got Age UK within Hammersmith and Fulham, the Alzheimer's Society, focused on dementia and supporting carers as well in the same vein. The Crichton Centre, befriending services through the telephone, home visiting and monthly lunches. We've got the Doorstep Library as well, which I mean, some of these, I mean, later on as we go through the discussion, I think it's important to probably highlight that there are some key services within the borough which lend themselves more to intergenerational practice, of which ones like the library service is one because of the reading, young people and older people reading together. We've got Fulham Good Neighbours as well, with their service around supporting mostly older people in the Fulham area. Hammersmith Community Gardens Association as well. I'm not going into the detail of what they do as such now, but if there's any questions about that, I'm happy to take those. But I think the overarching point that we discovered is that there is a lot of intergenerational practice already going on within our third sector, and it's deliberate. It's not by default, because the third sector work to a service specification or service level agreement. So it's within the expectation that they would do those things. There may be more work for us to do, or opportunities for us to consider how we can get more around intergenerational practice, but maybe that discussion will follow later. I think it's probably an apt moment to then maybe hand over to yourself, Jazz, just to talk a bit more about adult social care and intergenerational practice, if that's okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Jazz, for coming, and if you can say where you're from, but we very much appreciate you come along to talk about what you're doing in your kind of charity, if you like.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. Jazz Brown, the Chief Executive of Nubian Life Resource Centre. We are a care provider in the borough, providing care for African, Caribbean and Asian older people with complex health and social care needs. We've been doing intergenerational work for a number of years because we've always felt it's really important that older people remain connected to the community. And so even though we're a care provider, we've always worked with young people in different ways. But when I was asked to look at this a bit further, I thought it'd be really useful to look at the principles around intergenerational working, which could maybe create a framework for us. And so intergenerational activities, more than bringing young and older people together, it could be a systematic approach to community development and well-being that recognises the values and contributions of both generations. It's a collaborative approach that can move services away from being age-based where appropriate, to ensure that there's just that young and older people are connecting throughout all of the streams within community. And that intergenerational activity supports local communities to have agency. It supports them to collectively respond to local issues, and it also helps build resilience within local communities. The core principles of intergenerational activity is that it can help in the planning and delivery of effective services. And if those principles are followed or adhered to, then what it does is that it kind of takes away those silos that we have in community, and it really can create a real sense of community. And so any activity that's being carried out needs to ensure that it's mutually beneficial for everybody that's involved in that. That it's asset-based. So as Julius was saying, there's lots of work currently being undertaken within the borough, and that's assets, but we just don't really know prior to doing this piece of research as to who was doing what. Well-planned intergenerational activity needs to be included within strategic planning, that it's not an ad hoc thing that's happening over here. but actually it can help the local authority address some of the local issues that are occurring. Intergenerational activities, culturally appropriate. If we're looking at services or activities, then we can blend those to local need. And so we would remove or walk away from having this impact where services are being delivered, but certain parts of the community are not being served by core services. And so if an intergenerational approach is applied, then we're ensuring that we're looking at people's needs and we're taking a person-centered approach to how we're delivering or how we're designing services in the borough. It's also multidisciplinary, and it means that local workers can actually build their skills and their knowledge around local communities, because again, you're actually working together to address an issue. So it's not the third sector over here, it's not council, the local authority over here, and health doing something else, but actually if we're collectively working, we're all building our knowledge and skills. And so some of the benefits of intergenerational activities, that it's a creative approach to community development. As said earlier, it strengthens community relationships and it promotes active citizenship. It gives both generations or all generations a role to play within their local community. It challenges systematic ageism. So we're quite used to saying 0 to 5, you're over here, 6 to 10, you're over here, teenagers, you're over here. But actually there are some opportunities to bring those groups together. As I said earlier, it builds community resilience. Our approach to intergenerational work has always been, there's an idea, it starts with an idea, and then we just look at, okay, what do we need? Who do we need? What are the risks? And how do we mitigate those risks? And so if we don't start from a risk perspective, but actually just look at the creativity and what needs to be done, then we can develop all of those frameworks, all those safeguards that need to be in place. And it keeps the piece of work exciting and keeps people engaged. One of the pieces of work that we did a piece of work with young people across London, talking to them about what peace meant, and it was younger people and older people, and we did a competition in the borough where people could write in and say what peace meant to them, and we created a 7-foot wall that had all of their stories, their poems, their vision, and this was displayed at Westfield for a while, and everybody had a say in terms of what peace meant for them. We've done a lot of work with Westside Young Leaders Academy, where we've done community challenge days. So we've looked at things that young people could come into the centre and do, and whether it was dismantling a desk, building a plant shelf, cleaning the windows. But they had a day with our older clients, and they just naturally gravitated together in terms of grandparents and grandchildren. And for those that don't actually have those relationships in their life, so it was just really lovely to see that. And it was lovely to see our clients actually just giving advice and encouragement. They were just natural conversations that were occurring because we'd created that space. And then we had their parents came along as well. So then we ended up having a community meal, which was, a really lovely experience. One of our current projects is the Josiah Braithwaite Community Garden, named after one of our clients who was an avid gardener, really loved it. And that's intergenerational. We have families, we have young people, we have older people. I think the age range is between 5 and 87 at the moment attending the garden. And it was a lovely space during COVID as well, because we were able to give out keys to the garden and people were able to just go and sit there peacefully. And so we run a range of gardening activities across the borough and online as well. Out of the gardening club, there was a group of young mums and they were saying, look, we cannot afford to be buying clothes. We want to learn how to sew. And so we now have an intergenerational sewing club that takes place on a Friday evening, where people of all ages and different abilities are coming together and learning to sew, and they're working on their projects as well. So again, it's about not so much thinking about people's ages, but what are the mutual interests? What am I interested in? Is there someone else that's interested in it? And just really developing services or activities around people's interest. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Julius, you want to come back in at this stage?
Thank you. Thank you, Jazz. Yeah, I'm going to just come back in and talk a bit about what's happening with our colleagues in children's services. Now, I might not be able to do complete justice to that because they're not here today, but what I will do is if there's any questions or comments in relation to that, I can take that back to my colleagues in children's services. Now, most of the activity in children's services is focused on intensive smaller projects, but they do fall within their broad areas of education, community spaces, and family hubs. So within education, it is within their curriculum. So things like the international baccalaureate curriculum has something on creativity, action, and service as a component. And what's expected there is where you've got older volunteers mentoring younger people. So there's an interaction there between the different age groups, but also within the younger children studying curriculum as well. There's something called the philosophy for children delivered in schools with older volunteers supporting the younger pupils as well. So that's within the education bracket. And then they've got within their community spaces something where they actually provide spaces for older people to care for their grandchildren and meet other grandparents as well. And one of the key things they've highlighted there is there could be greater opportunity to increase that sort of activity as well. And then family hubs, the age range is predominantly 0 to 19 and up to 25, where special educational needs is involved. But there they highlight a key opportunity as well to see if they can promote that intergenerational practice there. So incorporating more of that into the family hubs approach, really. So those are the key, at a high level, those are the key areas for children's services. I mean, there might be more questions around children's, but as I said, unfortunately, they're not here today. But we can always take some of those questions back if there are any. I may go on now to talk about further opportunities, or should I pause there, Councillor?
I think I'm going to ask our two guests from the Youth Council.
Okay.
Welcome. I'm not sure, is it Precisa? Is that how I pronounce it?
It's Precisa.
Precisa. Okay, I will be more precise about it, Precisa. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming along. I think when I met with some of your colleagues from the Youth Council, I don't think you two were there at the meeting, so it's nice to meet you. But we had a very informal discussion back in July, and I was explaining that we wanted to have a really good strategy for the council, which brought in intergenerational working. We've heard a little bit from officers and from Jazz, who's a representative from the voluntary sector, which is very community based. And I know some of the things that the Youth Council said to me that they thought would work across in generations was about digital skills, because you guys are a lot quicker and a lot better at it than we are. So that's something that you might want to comment about. They also felt quite strongly that perhaps older people had the opportunity to pass on skills in some things that you younger people might not do. And we've heard a little about sewing today. That's just one example, but it could be playing the piano. It could be all sorts of things. So we had a little bit of a discussion about that. We understand that it's quite difficult for volunteering opportunities for young people. They raised that with me. And the other thing, and this is very pertinent to the Youth Council, I think, is understanding democracy and understanding local democracy. And we've got a really good youth council here, and every year you come and give us a lovely report, but we very much want to see your ideas integrated into the policy that we are producing as councillors, because we're elected by all the people in the borough, but we want to make sure that your ideas are part of what we do. So that's why we wanted to invite you along on what is really important, because we started off on the topic of isolation and loneliness, I believe. But actually, I'm aware that it's not just old people that feel isolated and lonely. Sometimes it could be young people as well. So I'd like to welcome you. If there's anything that you've heard or anything you want to ask the officers, then please just, chip in. And then I'm going to ask the committee if there's anything they'd like to ask. So I don't know if either of you want to pick up on anything you've heard. Adam, yeah.
So first I'm Adam Seymour from the Youth Council. And first I'd like to comment on what we said about intergenerational working, helping with sharing skills. So there hasn't been much change to what we think in the Youth Council about what we could do to help with digital skills. But to reiterate that from earlier in the year, we were thinking that younger people in the borough would be able to share their digital skills with people who hadn't had a chance to learn them in their youth. Secondly, we do also feel that there's a lot of skills that older people in the borough possess that could be beneficial to younger people, and we'd like to see some skill sharing on that. And the last thing I'd like to comment on is just the about understanding democracy. There's been a few of my colleagues and my just young people from the borough who don't really understand the inner workings of how our council works, or how really any London authority works. And even sometimes their parents don't know really where to go vote, how to go vote, and such. So what we'd like to see is some increased awareness with young people with democracy. Oh, sorry. And lastly, about volunteer opportunities, that's something that personally I've been working on, and we're aiming to see if we can bring a platform to an online platform to connect charities and young people to facilitate volunteering and reward it. Thank you.
Thank you. Precisa, is there anything you'd like to say?
I was just going to comment on the fact that, social awareness of different things. Like, I know maybe some older people may have the different things that they might know that they want to share with younger children. Some children don't have grandparents to look up to. So I know my grandma used to try to teach me how to knit. And I know I've known quite a few kids who would like to learn that as well. So maybe I'll want to see, and I know some of the youth council would also want to see older people sharing what they know about what they've learned in their childhood.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to the committee to ask questions though, but by all means, if there's anything you want to ask or want to contribute a bit later, then I'll give you another opportunity to chip in. Okay. Anybody from the committee? Councillor Brockbank Fowler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I heard a programme on the radio, which I found very interesting a number of years ago, which mentioned a charity which encouraged students and young people in their first job, in their 20s and so on, to be matched up with older people who may have a spare room or something, or their partners died, or there's a spare room, and so on and so forth, in return for very minimal rent on behalf of the younger person, and for some help, practical help for the older person, putting out the bins, hoovering or something like that. And and obviously, you know, a certain amount of companionship. So it worked for the older person. It worked for the younger person because they saved money and so on and so forth. And I wondered if we were represented in the borough by one of the branches of this charity that organises this. I mean, it was London-based, but I can't remember the name. Have you heard of it?
Oh, coming. No, I haven't heard of it actually, but I think I've heard of the concept. So, and I think what it highlights here is some sort of opportunity and something we could probably take back and try to research and look into that. It does as well touch upon the role of maybe some of our infrastructure, third sector organisations who might be able to help to unpick that idea a bit.
Yes, I'm not suggesting the council do it. I don't think the council should be doing these things because we have the third sector who are set up to do it. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't advertise it in the weekly news email, you know, on behalf of the charity, if you could find out who they were.
Yeah, I think if you don't mind, let's go away and explore that actually, because I think it sounds a really good idea in support of promoting intergenerational.
Well, the people that they interviewed who were doing it were obviously all very happy because there wouldn't be much point in interviewing people who weren't. And obviously it wouldn't be for everyone.
Yes.
And there's a great deal of trust involved and so on and so forth. But I just think that the council can be advertising something like that if it can exist locally.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. I also have heard of such schemes, but I've no idea what they're called. So I definitely think that is one to go off and explore, to bring in as part of the strategy. We certainly don't want to miss that opportunity. So yeah.
Well, no, because when I read all of this, there were so many areas that were covered by the third sector. But this just struck me immediately as one of the most, you know, given that rents, you know, are really so high, you know, and older people tend to have larger properties, and you know, they might want some company and you know, so the whole thing really, I thought it was a brilliant idea when I heard about it.
Thank you. That's definitely one we will take away for sure. Councillor Perez.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to all the speakers this evening. It's great to see this very impactful initiative and get to know more about the strategy and the vision that we have going forward. So are there communities that we would like to work with in terms of intergenerational work, or that we want to engage more with, that maybe you have identified that could benefit from the project?
We haven't got as far as identifying communities specifically. So at this stage, it's somewhat restricted to the fact that we know there is the need amongst older people, younger people, and I must include the LGBTQ older group as well. But again, I think as we go forward, maybe we will be able to identify some specific groups. That's
Yep, Councillor
I
Perez.
think I'm just reflecting a little bit on some work that I've done in the past with the voluntary sector, and myself being a first generation migrant and having worked with Latin American migrants here in the UK, and thinking of some of the challenges that the older population that we work with were enduring back then. So in terms of isolation and loneliness and additional challenges in terms of understanding the language, understanding the system, leaving all your friends, your connections behind, which brought on extra sort of barriers to that process, and the importance of such lovely initiatives that you are describing. Just wondering whether, yes, maybe through the third sector, there are like opportunities as well to bridge processes if there are communities or minority communities that you are identified going forward.
No, I think you highlight a key point there, Councillor Perez, and I think again highlighting just how important the third sector is in this space really. And I think from going through the report, the third sector has responded well to it, but there's still a range of opportunities unexplored here. So I think certainly we'll take on that point really, and I think it will actually almost unravel itself, I think, as we begin to delve further into it as well. Yeah.
Councillor Vaughan. Councillor Daly, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a lot of commonality between the things that people are saying in here, which is just so warming to hear, so heartwarming. Adam was talking about needing to be volunteering opportunities that they can facilitate and that where people can be rewarded. Precise was talking about skill sharing, particularly for people who don't have grandparents, which is really heartening to hear. Julius, you talked about community spaces and family hubs and targeting older people, and there are a lot of challenges involved in that. You used the word could and might. But Jazz, I'm really interested to hear you talk about your garden project and your sewing club, and you've got those working really well. So I wondered if you could share what the magic ingredients, knowing that there's demand and interest on both sides, what's the magic ingredient that made those two particular initiatives work so well?
I think it's about genuine interest in what people want to do and creating that space and support to do it. Because I don't know if there is a magic approach. I think we're just very much around people and what people want to achieve, and then how do we develop that support to enable them to achieve that. And sometimes it is about creating the space. Sometimes it is another resource in terms of the children's facilitator for the garden volunteers those Friday evenings. And so it's a willingness on her behalf to give that time at no cost to us. And we just hand over the venue. And so I think it's about that commitment, that whole focus on who people are and what they want to do, and just really looking at how we could make things happen. And again, that whole thing around having welcoming spaces, that when someone comes through the door, they feel welcomed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Vaughan, sorry, Councillor Day.
Slight follow up, sorry. So the other thing that kind of occurs to me is that within the borough, we have some fantastic youth services. We've got some kind of third sector youth clubs that do some fantastic work, and there's maybe some of an opportunity there. They have all sorts of interests, and I'm listening to you saying that it needs to be quite organic, if you like, that it needs to be a shared interest. And I'm wondering if there's kind of something around bringing in some of that, some of the youth services, and particularly thinking about some of the unspent money from the King's Coronation Fund for youth services, and how that might be a lovely thing to do. And then also, Adam, I really like the idea of understanding democracy and how the council works. And if you find out, will you tell me? No.
Yes.
But I think there's something really lovely in that, and being able to ask those questions and discover, really. I think that's a really interesting area, and I'm sure lots of people would share that kind of interest in how things work. Thank you.
Does anybody want to come back on anything Councillor Daly's just said for the moment? Hey, Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for a very exciting presentation, and I so much sharing the ideas and the projects that have been going on so far, particularly in Nubian life. Very interested that there's a big third sector investment programme, and there's a rich base of intergenerational projects. And I think this possibly touches on something you were saying, Julius, and may follow on from what Councillor Day was saying. What can be done to support these projects and other projects to prosper in the borough? But I'm in particular thinking about what is the infrastructure that we can create so that people can actually sort of, when they've got the ideas, such as sharing digital skills, learning about local democracy or whatever it might be, that when there is that shared interest, there's a sort of place to go and there's infrastructure to actually sort of create those links that people actually want. So there's obviously, and I noticed that in the papers, there's some examples from other councils. I think Stockport Council was mentioned about some sort of sharing of digital and other knowledge. So, I mean, obviously we can learn from that, but it feels a bit like the sort of council perhaps in a facilitation role, working with other third sector partners. Where can we sort of create that sort of infrastructure so that the partners working together can sort of, you know, give some impetus behind perhaps a bit of a thirst for some other projects. I mean, there might not be, you know, tens of other projects, but there might be sort of 4 or 5 other projects that come up every year.
No, thank you, Councillor Vaughan. Yeah, I think, you know, absolutely. I think I could see there we need to be that glue to actually, or that bridge really. I'll talk a bit about what we've got in place now by way of infrastructure. We clearly have got a very diverse and rich third sector, but we've also got the small grants application process. So I think it really is sort of a good timing, this discussion in some respect, because the current themes, cross-cutting themes are talked about are broad enough to be able to incorporate applications for small grants for activity around intergenerational practice. If any organisation or small group so desires to take that forward. So there is an element of a link and a bridge there as we speak. Also good timing in that we are currently midway through reviewing our 3SIF, Third Sector Investment Fund strategy. Amongst the many other priorities, intergenerational practice can fit in as one of those priorities as well. And though in formation, I know that the new or amended overarching themes, again, will be just as broad, but they'll be refreshed to incorporate our new priorities, of which one will be intergenerational practice. So those are some of the things that are going on now, which will form or do form a bridge actually to enable anyone out there. There is something in here though about how we articulate this to the group, to our groups as well. So that's an opportunity for us to also take away and consider carefully, because it won't be us articulating something completely new. It already fits into our cross-cutting priorities. So I think it's just well timed, I think.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
I've got everybody now. Oh, sorry, Jazz.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think we could possibly make better use of our volunteer centre within the borough. And whether it's a case of doing a call out or saying this is something that we're really interested in exploring further through there. Within the third sector, we have a number of forums. We have Community Connect that was set up by People Arise now, and that we meets I think it's every month or every other month. And it's where we bring local issues, or if somebody's got a topic that they want to talk about. And so we already have those mechanisms in place that we could probably make more use of in terms of furthering the conversation, because I think there would be a lot more people that would be interested.
Sorry, can I just come back?
I'll let you come back and then I'm going to make a
Sorry,
comment on
no, sorry,
that
thank you
as
for that response. I think it's, I think there's a sort of need to, and it sounds like you've got some ideas about how to do that. Is obviously there's a bit of undercurrent of people wanting to do some stuff, and hopefully there's sort of both the small grants might help that, the use of the volunteer. Obviously, it needs sort of people. It might need a bit of money, but it sounds like there's the room for that sort of innovation of taking people's, wish to learn about local democracy or whatever it is, and to try and actually put that into practice. I mean, I'm assuming some of these things will work very well. Sounds like some of the projects at Newbury Life working really well. Some of them might not quite catch on, but it sounds like within the infrastructure you've got at the moment, you may be able to sort of make that work, and sort of, it'd be great to see some of that innovation and taking forward some of the projects that people would like to see, I think. So yeah, well, thanks, and hopefully you can weave that into your reviews.
Can I just pick up the point you made about the volunteers centre? Because one of the things that young people were saying is there's lack of opportunities for under 16s to volunteer. I'm not quite sure how we sort that out, but do you think that there's potential to work with the volunteer centre to make that more effective for young people?
I think so. I think it's worth starting the conversation with the volunteer centre. I know we most certainly have provided work experience placements for local secondary schools. And so I just think it's not known broadly beyond, you know, the local schools that are near us. But more than happy to have a conversation with you guys.
I think we've got a commitment for the Youth Council there somewhere along the line. So that's
Yes.
some positive you can take away from this evening's meeting anyway. Councillor Train.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you very much for coming along. Really good presentations. Thank you. Really, I just wanted to pick up on what Councillor Vaughan was saying about this articulation, because I think that's that really shines out, partly as well as the sort of traditional skills. So it might mean that we go to, you know, youth centres and see if there's an appetite for learning DIY, changing a plug, you know, those really sort of practical things that I feel young people almost don't learn anymore because they're so digitally active. They're not so physically active. And vice versa, you know, the Age UK we know is sort of mainly involved the aged population, and whether we need to approach them about how we put them together with young people, and going back to the voluntary note as well, is how we oversee that volunteering. Sorry, I know it's another point, but the question is exactly with particularly Duke of Edinburgh in the secondary school is a real push for volunteering, and we've got all these young people that are under 16 that literally have very few places to volunteer. So I think it is about the articulation and getting those two groups where we can cross over.
Thank you. Councillor Salute.
Two things. One, to pick up on Jazz's point about People Arise Now, which I've also seen. I've attended those community connect events, and they're wonderful for bringing together charities, the council, local organizations and local services. And I think always the one thing that comes out of it, and it's something that we've mentioned before in this committee, is that sometimes charities do not even know the services available to each other, and they would all benefit from having that, whether, you know, an understanding of what services are out there. And I think it would definitely be something that would benefit the volunteer services unit, and also, you know, volunteers themselves to understand, okay, what is that and how they can help. I just had one question. One thing that is mentioned on page 21 is about education and intergenerational activities in the context of the creativity, action and service component of the International Baccalaureate. Having done that program many years ago, one of the most impactful activities we did was for students to go into care homes and spend quality time with you know, older people, just not necessarily doing some specific activity, but just, you know, befriend someone. And I was just surprised that maybe this is not really mentioned there. Is it possible for something like this? Is it allowed? Would it be something that is an option to, I don't know, schools to explore, or, you know, care homes to explore, to pair with, let's say, a school, and perhaps do this on a regular basis?
Could I perhaps chip in about Hammersmith Academy here? Yes. Hammersmith Academy have in the past had quite a good scheme like that, Councillor Salute. I think they're trying to implement something again now that we're in the new term, where they had young people from the academy going into the Elgin Resource Centre, which is right next door. It stopped because of COVID, is my understanding, but I think that they're intending to do that again. So I think the answer to your question, and I'm sure Julius will probably be able to chip in maybe with some other examples, is that what's in this report is quite limited in terms of the things that are going on out there. There's probably quite a lot more auditing that we can do in terms of what's happening. So this is very much the first stages, but there's no reason why something like that can't happen. And it has certainly happened in Conningham ward, which I represent. So I've got to put a chip in for Hammersmith Academy in my own ward here. Julius, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, thank you, councillors. I think what I'd say there is I'd certainly take that back to my colleagues in children's for them to explore further, because I think in earlier conversations that we have had in the build up to this board, similar conversations did take place. And I personally recall watching a programme, I think a number of years ago, and I mentioned this in one of our meetings where we had or observed nursery children going into care homes, and they take walks to a park, and there's probably be a range of challenges surrounding and making that happen, but it's about exploring that sort of exploring that, given that we know what sort of benefits can arise for health and well-being purposes, really. But I'll take it back to colleagues in children's as well.
Yep, Councillor Trey.
Sorry, there was one other thing that occurred to me, which is what do you think the crossover between the voluntary sector and the paid for sector? Do you think in the cost of living crisis that the amount of volunteers has gone down because people are too busy actually earning money, or have you found the voluntary sector is still quite healthy in terms of bodies they're putting themselves forward to volunteer?
Don't know who's best placed to comment on that.
I'll try. I think it's a mix of things. I think if we take Fulham Good Neighbours as an example, where they support older people to manage their gardens, so they send volunteers in and they do their gardening for them, and they befriend those older people. I don't think they're seeing a decrease in the number of volunteers, but certainly the amount of time that volunteers may have is decreasing. I think we're trying to do a recruitment drive next week around that, trying to increase volunteering within Hammersmith and Fulham.
Precisa.
I was going to say that, you know how there are a lot of adults who may have done volunteering in the past. I think now's a good time to start allowing more children to do more volunteering for different things, because children don't really earn money unless they're selling like sweets or something. So I think maybe you should start doing more things that can allow children to start volunteering with older people.
Thank you. Adam, are there any comments or further observations you'd like to make before I kind of bring this section of the meeting to a close? I think we've got some actions and some conclusions out of this.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that I've also noticed, being in the volunteer industry, I've also noticed after COVID a sharp kind of downturn of people having enough time to volunteer, but also a surprising increase among young people to want to volunteer and either not having the opportunities or not having the time with their studies. Yeah, that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just on that point that you were making about volunteers, I know, I'm sure all of us as councillors sit on different boards which involve volunteers, and I know certainly the one that I sit on, they struggle with volunteers. The turnover is quite high because people do need to get back into work and be economically active, so it is quite difficult. So I think it is quite a challenge for the voluntary sector at the moment to have long-term volunteers, which is why it might very well be an opportunity to allow younger people to volunteer in the appropriate circumstances. And I think that's certainly something that we can take away and try and develop from this evening's discussion. Are there any further comments? Yes, sorry. Yes, welcome. Thank you for coming. Would you come up to a microphone, because then we can hear you? Yeah. There's one there actually. There's one there. There's one there. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good discussion. I'm Shad from POPS, from Sobus, which runs the POPS Forum, providers of older people services. We have Nubian Life, Age UK, Fulham Good Neighbours, and about 20 plus others join that forum. So very happy to promote this. And I have experience going back over 10 years in this local authority where there was intergenerational funding. And one of the things that came back was how older people and young people were kind of surprised what they learned from each other. That, you know, younger people discovered that, I suppose, older people were young like themselves once. So I think that was, but I think that's, it's a good initiative to try and fund, and we'll be happy to promote it. And in terms of volunteers, from our perspectives, the number of volunteers is going down, feedback we're getting. I think they're also, in terms of young people, if they could access that, I mean, obviously safeguard training and GDPR, you have to be aware of that. You need to provide support for the sector to be able to keep within, but want to make sure good practice is observed. So I think all those things, we were very keen to see more resources come to the sector, but also increase volunteering if possible. And I would say there are mechanisms within the sector to provide that training. We've been able to access health and wellbeing grants from people like CLCH and the NHS and the mental health grants program. So we want more investment from health and other things that could go towards these kind of projects because they're good for health and wellbeing. So yeah, any money can be levered. We would be happy to use that to lever in even more money. But I just want from the VCS perspective, because we have an overview, and the POPS Forum is really successful because the members are really working in a collaborative way as well. So it's something that we would encourage on this kind of initiatives. So I just wanted to say from a VCS perspective. I know these comments.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I'm sorry, I recognise, well, I didn't recognise Sobus, but well, thank you for the contribution.
All right, thanks.
I think, yep, sorry.
Sorry, just one thing to add to what Councillor Trahey said earlier on. One of the ways in which it's not sort of maybe slightly tangential, but obviously a lot of 15-year-olds in year 10 tend to do work experience towards the end of that year and are always looking for a range of placements they can do. I understand there's some problem around insurance for 15-year-olds, which isn't particularly helpful given the fact that they want work experience. But this is one area where perhaps there can be some intergenerational working, but also there are potentially a range of young people who would want to do work experience in some of the voluntary sector across the borough, which could involve some of these projects. So I think in terms of infrastructure, it'd be good to be able to sort of absorb that enthusiasm for the 1 or 2 weeks towards the end, sort of in June or July, when a lot of our young people are looking for opportunities to do work experience, in the borough.
Thank you. Before I try to bring it to a conclusion, are there any other comments? No. So you'll note the recommendation. Yes. Would you like to contribute? Would you like to go to the microphone there, because then we can hear you?
Hi there.
If you could say who you are.
I'm Katrina and I'm Precise's mum. So I have been in the borough since I was a child. So I used to be in youth council many years ago. I'm 36 now. I started at 15. I went to William Morris and then I joined the Hammersmith and Fulham Volunteer Centre at the age of 16 when I dropped out of college. And then I have stayed in the sector ever since. I've been in the youth and social sector for 20 years. I still work within Hammersmith organisations, and obviously we live here. So I just want to say, when I was a volunteer in 2005, so we used to have a lot of projects like where older people will teach us younger people how to, for example, do radio shows. So we used to work with Riverside FM, and we used to get radio production courses where the adults would teach us how to produce radio shows. And then we used to actually run radio shows on Riverside FM. Then we also had a lock-in, log-on project that Tony Wiltshire used to run for the community safety unit, which I was part of. Again, we were taught how to edit magazines, how to put magazines together. And then we would then go out and make a youth project or the community project for Hammersmith Fulham. And then for the British Red Cross, I was involved in a befriending project where we would befriend adults with either mental health issues or who are isolated or have got some sort of issue for why they need somebody to befriend them and help them feel like part of society again. And that used to be really good, and it helped a lot of people in the borough many years ago. And to be honest with you, I haven't really heard of anything like that recently, but just because I've seen it with my own eyes being a volunteer and seeing how many people it helped. I don't know if anyone knows Marion Schumann, when she ran the volunteer center. So I was one of her young people, okay? And like they invested a lot into us as a volunteer center, and they gave us a lot of training. And actually it was because of volunteering that I can now say that I'm a drug prevention officer for the government. I've worked for Hammersmith Fulham Community Safety Unit. I've been every job title there possibly can be in the social sector and stuff like that. You know, if I didn't get a chance to volunteer, I could have just been a college dropout who maybe went to smoke some weed and do nothing, you know, but instead my life was turned around. And I just believe that volunteering is very important. And you're right when you said that prices have gone up. Obviously not that many people can volunteer, because I help a lot of young people to get into volunteering and they're like, but I can't afford it. And I get that. But if you make them see it as investing into their future, giving them training, qualifications from their volunteering, then actually it isn't slave labor. It isn't wasting time. It isn't just helping others. It's actually helping yourself as well. So sorry, I know I go on for a little bit, but basically, I believe that volunteering should come with training, qualifications, and something that they can actually use so that they can then if they can be somebody in a job title, and it would help them.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think I'm not sure how many years ago you're referring to, but obviously
20 years ago.
20 years ago. Obviously, sort of things change as years go on, but it doesn't mean to say that we can't look at what was really good practice in the past and try to kind of recreate or having a more modern version of the experience that you've had. And that's certainly one of the purposes. This is a very early report, which is what I was going to say when I sum up in a minute. It's very first draft, it's very early report. So all contributions will help us build what I've put down here as the infrastructure to make it happen. So kind of in summing up, I think I started off by saying, we have not got tons of money as a council to suddenly invest a lot in this. But what we do need to do is get the best of what is out there and actually try to make it work and work in a way that you've just described. So thank you very much for that contribution. It was most welcome. Thank you, everybody. There's a few really practical things. So I think certainly the issue that was picked up about the housing, that's something we can go off and investigate. As I said, this is about the opportunities. It's about developing this policy. So I think we've got quite a lot of really good ideas here. The other kind of key point I'd like to pick up is we talked about voluntary sector grant funding quite a lot. So that was touched on quite a lot. And I know Julius, yourself said, I think we're about halfway through the current grant period. So we will be looking at that. And do we build in intergenerational as one of the key things that we might want to build into future funding? I don't know. That's a question that we need to look at. So that's something else that I think's come out very loud and clear. I think what you were just talking about again, the life skills that I know certainly the Youth Council are looking at. That is a massive issue that we want to try and build into this glue to this infrastructure. So it's very much about what the council's role is as a facilitator and trying to make this work on an ever decreasing budget. I do need to say that because I think we're all very conscious of that. And I think Councillor Perez, you made the point very early on about left out communities. And I think as part of this work, it's really important for us to identify that perhaps there are some communities that we're not really picking up, not just with this work, but with quite a lot of other work that we might be doing in the borough. And it's how do we try and identify how intergenerational practice would benefit them as well. Just trying to pick up other points. And one of the other things I think, Jazz, that you mentioned early on that struck me was about not boxing people into categories in terms of their age groups. So we can say we've got the Youth Council here and we might be talking about older people, particularly in adult social care, but it's actually the whole range of age groups that we want to bring together. And going back to the housing point that Councillor Brockbank Fowler raised, one of the other sort of big intergenerational issues, which we've not even touched on here, but it was part of the sort of policy background that we investigated, was the sort of intergenerational inequality of wealth, which is very much the sort of economic side of what the Resolution think tank have been doing, which kind of connects in a little bit to the housing issue. So there's a lot here. I think we've got a lot of recommendations. Certainly with the Youth Council, we've got a few things to come and talk to you about, or you to come and talk to us about, which we'll get back in touch about. So thank you very much for coming along and talking to us. Much appreciated. And just to say, I think that we might be talking to the Youth Council in a big way in December. So I might see you back again and the committee might see you back again then. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you, everybody. We'll just take about 3 or 4 minutes break before we go on to the next item, if that's okay. So thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. After a short break, our next item on the agenda is an update on the digital inclusion strategy. We've had a report on digital inclusion come to the committee, I think, well over a year ago, and we had an update in between. I think a lot of work has gone on since then, and I'm pleased to see that some of the things that the committee have raised in the past have kind of been incorporated into the strategy as we have got before us this evening. So it's really for officers to give us an update and for us to continue having an input in the development of the strategy before, I believe it will be Councillor Ree, who is unable to come along this evening, kind of takes it to Cabinet. But we have Councillor Florian, who will give us a bit of an update of what's been happening, and he is our lead member for digital innovation, lead member for digital innovation. So I have the officers giving us a short presentation to update us. So if you could just say who you are as you present, that would be fantastic. So over to officers.
Nicola Ellis, Strategic Director, Chief Operating Officer, Corporate Services. I'm just going to do a very, very brief introduction, which you've probably covered most of it. So as members of the board will be aware, we've been working on the digital inclusion strategy for some time, and we're really proud of the work we've done in terms of co-producing the strategy with residents, with members, and with the voluntary and community sector. So when we came to you last, it was by means of an update. We are now at the point where we have a draft strategy and the beginnings of an action plan for delivery. And so that's what we wanted to share with you for your comment before we take that forward into a more final version. So I'll hand over to my colleagues, Darren and Tina, who will present a summary of that strategy. Thank you.
Good evening all. So I'm Darren Sword, the Assistant Director for Resident Experience Transformation, working in corporate services with Nicola and Tina in digital services. So as you've kindly mentioned, this came to Policy and Oversight Board back in December. We've had a number of updates pre and since with SLT and certainly members on that. So what I'd really like to do is just ask you to consider the report on our draft strategy, add any additional comments that you so helpfully gave over the last Policy and Oversight Boards, and really just have a discussion on anything that we've got within the report that may need further information. And sorry, I'm two screens at the moment. Tina, can I hand over to you? Is there anything you want to just start with on the background, if that's all right?
Not really. I think we've covered most of the details, so I'm happy to answer any questions, I think, after Darren has done his piece. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tina. So work has been ongoing since 2022, where the council worked with our local partners, Agilicis, to put together a draft framework and our first iteration of our digital inclusion strategy. So that was done in collaboration with council officers and local partners. So the aim of that was to provide a framework and a set of prioritised actions to ensure that all local people can confidently access, use and benefit from digital services. Following this, the Resident Experience and Access Programme Digital Accessibility Group, which has been spoken about before, but just to remind those listening in and here today, that's a group of 12 residents, varying ages, varying abilities from across the borough who attend a meeting every month alongside other council officers. So we've got 8 departments, including that, adults, children's, housing, digital services at a wide range. So following that, we were tasked with co-producing the strategy. So over about 5 or 6 months, so June of last year through to the end of the year, we met regularly to discuss what residents thought were the barriers, what they thought we should prioritise towards the end of those sessions. Really meaningful sessions. I'd say a really good example of co-production. We took from that a lot of information, as you can imagine, which is summarised in the report. What we then did was arrange a session with people in the voluntary sector to really talk about if there were any gaps that we'd missed, get their point of view in, because obviously that needs to feed in to the strategy. Overall, it was a really good day. 30 organisations were represented. People who are here today were actually in the room with us. What we got from that were just additional detail, things that we needed to look at. But generally, the agreement was there on what residents had said. What we also did in that time was had an event at Lyric Square. I remember that day, it was really windy, but we had a lot of footfall residents coming through. I believe some members came along as well. And again, really good at just reiterating what was said by residents. I mean, it's quite common, to be fair, what the issues are. I don't think it's a localized issue, as we probably all know. It's quite national. There are some local things like around access to broadband, tariffs, devices, etc. But it was a really, really good, worthwhile event. So with all that together, what we've now been able to do is pull together our draft strategy. So one other thing just to add is the fact that we, of course, came to Policy and Oversight Board in September and December of last year. A number of really helpful feedback was given. So just to very briefly summarize, but that's in paragraph 15 to 22, I believe, of the report, was, well, firstly, feedback on our actual website, our accessibility, ease of navigation, the user experience. So one thing I would say in terms of my day job, it's fundamental to REAP, and one of the biggest principles that we've got. Since we last came to Policy and Oversight Board, we have had numerous co-production sessions with our DAG, or with DAG, sorry, where we've looked at a number of different web pages. I guess the best example I can give is our cost of living pages, which also are on our new website for those that have seen it, which will be rolled out for the entire website will be coming out in the next month or so. We've also done a lot of work with DAG on revenue and benefits pages, particularly around annual billing. So things like having, they said to us, having a bill online annotated, which was accessible so people could use. I think we've cut around 15% of calls through people using online, being able to self-serve, and feedback generally has been good. Those are just two examples. There's numerous, and our forward plan for DAG for co-production is filled to the brim. Something else that was discussed was single sign-on. So that's access to different portals, which work has really began at pace now, particularly with Revs and Bens and housing, which has already gone live. Environmental services are coming. So in the next 3 to kind of 12 months, there'll be a lot more work done on that. One of the other points at previous board was around access and support in libraries, something we are currently looking at, which you'll note on the plan, focused for now on devices and access to data. But again, there's more detail in the actual report. Advice and guidance seems like a theme, even listening to colleagues before, and how we tie that in is something that we're also looking at. Something board had mentioned before was information about social tariffs, which we've since added to our cost of living pages, but more than that, made colleagues around the council aware. So cost of living team, revenue and benefits, housing, adult social care, children's social care. Still a lot more work to do on that, but that is something that we've done. Something that was mentioned at December was around face-to-face services at 145 King Street, which we, of course, have done since we reopened. We are continually helping people to either self-serve, so giving them those digital skills and confidence to be able to do that, or on the other hand, helping them to complete whatever inquiry is needed. A lot of work, I can't even say a lot of work has been done on adult education because that's been ongoing. So I've got some numbers a bit later in the piece around, in fact, I've got those now. So in 22-23, we've got 4 or 5 courses, some free, some have a nominal cost. There were 10 courses run over the last academic year with a total of 69 enrolled learners. I know we want to look to improve that in this coming year with the courses having just started. And we're working with adult education on that and options there. So as I say, lots of work already going on, but we really appreciate the feedback that came from board in December. And if I just go on to the next slide, sorry, I'll stick with the slide I'm on. So our vision is quite clear and concise as to what we want to achieve. It's aligned with other partners like the Greater London Authority or Lottie, which is essentially to make the borough more digitally inclusive by 2025, place where residents have access to digital skills, devices and support that they need to achieve their aspirations. Something to be said about businesses too. Our strategy is, as it's always been, and what the council stands for, which is working together with residents, listening, as well as partners, of course, and services across the council, having that real coordinated, joined up approach to digital inclusion that's informed by data and everything that we have at our disposal. So hopefully you'll agree, quite a clear vision and strategy on that. Now, what we've kind of learned. So over the last 18 or so months, from that initial piece of work with Agilicis all the way through to Policy and Oversight Board, or the numerous sessions we've had with our digital accessibility group, it's kind of boiled down to 4 pillars, which are on the slide in front and in the report and the strategy document. So the first is around devices. So that's reasonably straightforward in terms of that's having access to the right device. So that was something residents said was key. It's not just having access to a device, it's the right device for different types of users. So whether that be a PC, a laptop or a smartphone, etc. Something of critical importance as well as the software to support that. So we have people with disabilities on the group too. So certain, say, speech recognition or screen reader tech is really important on said technology. Location of devices is quite important, obviously, too, whether that be in your own home, using Wi-Fi in and around the borough, in any of our council buildings like libraries or 145. Residents really said that was a priority that we needed to look at. And as we get to the action plan shortly, something key that's in our kind of grasp that we can do and our control to get ready quick. We spoke of Tech for Kids, I think, earlier. Obviously, that was a really good example during COVID, something that could be achieved. And it's really building on that whole model. The second pillar is around connectivity. So that means access to whether it be Wi-Fi or 4 or 3G, I guess even 3G at home, in council buildings, navigating the best value tariffs and understanding differences in data needs. In fact, that was one thing that came up, and even to myself, knowing that so many different tariffs and ways in which you can sign up to broadband, knowing what's best for you, whether it be gaming or streaming or just, you know, going on the internet. So that was quite key, which actually links to the third pillar, which kind of almost brings things together. So that's around advice and guidance, again, touched upon earlier, but it's huge. There is a lot out there, which I think we've all discussed previously. We know this plan is about bringing things together. In fact, there was something earlier in the week, a voluntary organization put something on around devices and training, something we weren't aware of. But again, it just goes to show the breadth of things that are out there. And what we're aiming to do is very quickly bring all those things together. And last but not least is around skills. So it's all well and good having connectivity, it's all well and good having devices and advice and guidance, but you need the right skills that give that confidence for residents and just users to have that knowledge as to how to use a device, for example. That's just one example. Skills in terms of courses is obviously key as well. So as I say, we've simplified that into 4 pillars. In terms of our objectives, I won't necessarily go through all of these in detail. Hopefully they are reasonably straightforward, but if there are any questions after I've spoken, then of course we can discuss. But it kind of summarizes everything I've said around skills, giving access to everyone who needs and wants support has it, because I think that is something to say that, especially in the work that I do, not everyone wants to access services digitally. And one thing this council can be very proud of is the fact that we're not cutting services or face-to-face services. And the mantra of REAP is to encourage those who can self-serve to free up resource for those that need that little bit of help to be able to gain that bit of help. So I think that's quite key. I think the only other thing really to pick up on is residents feeling safe and secure. We know there's a massive national push around scam and fraud, which again, there's so much resource, not just on that, but across the whole spectrum that we really want to build into that third pillar in advice and guidance. But of course, I think what is really important is measuring that impact that we've had. It's all well and good putting all these things in, but we really want to make sure that whether we're reaching certain communities, we are really making the difference. It's not about age either, because as was spoken before, there are older adults who can give skills to younger adults and vice versa. So I think it's, you know, we're really keen on working going forward on picking up one of those measures, which is part of the next phase of the plan, I guess. So coming on to the plan, I think what I'll do is just, if okay, pick on some of the more immediate things that are either in train, or most of these are in train or ongoing. I'll hand over to Nicola in a second to talk about the first, which is about governance. But before I do that, I'll pick up on the others. So cross-council collaboration, as I said before, we're aware of lots of work going on around different departments. So we've already started tying up with colleagues in housing, social care, economy, digital services. It's just a case of really formalizing that now. Access to devices. So working with colleagues in libraries, we've put in a joint bid 2 weeks ago for data sims, and we'll be doing the same for devices, just like we did before with Tech for Kids. We should actually hear with respect to data sims whether we have been allocated some, and that will just be to give those through the libraries with some assistance. Access to Wi-Fi, likewise, working with libraries colleagues on exploring completely free access, but also the data sims that I mentioned. There is work with colleagues in economy around some of the broadband providers we've got, so community fibre, and how we bring those to more of our community centres. So I know there is a meeting at the end of this month to take that forward. Information, advice and guidance, we've heard of that spoken about a lot. We are tying that together with other colleagues across the piece as to having that in one place, because obviously it doesn't make much sense having that done separately, but we want one platform that brings all of this together, including what Julius and colleagues were saying earlier. Digital champions work that has been ongoing for at least a year. To be honest, needs ramping up and needs coordination. I think that's one thing to say, is that there is now a level of coordination to bring all these things together, which actually is probably a good segue, Nicola, to governance and that top one, if you can see.
Yeah. I think one of our first steps, really, we mentioned that we've worked very closely with the voluntary and community sector in developing the strategy, and delivery of the outcomes is not just reliant on the council, it is across the voluntary and community sector. So I think we need to pull together some form of alliance or board where we're working together to deliver the outcomes of the strategy. And I think that's one of our first steps. And whether we perhaps have member involvement in that board is probably something that we need to consider as to be our first step to move this forward. Because as Darren mentioned, there's a lot going on across the borough, delivering outcomes as it is, and we just need to really coordinate that and make sure that we're all working to the same objectives, really. So I think that's really our first step moving forward.
And then just in closing, really, in terms of next steps, as you mentioned, Chair, next steps will be further conversation with Councillor Ree. But just before we get to that point, after we have comments from yourselves on board today, our plan is to go back to our digital accessibility group in October, just to replay the comments that have come back since, essentially get official sign-off from residents and DAG members, sorry, that they're happy with any amendments perhaps or anything that we've added. And then, of course, as Nicola says, look at putting that action plan in and next steps for Cabinet. The other, just in closing, I would say thank you to lots of councillors and members who have been involved in this every step of the way. Of course, board have every step of the way. It really has been an excellent example of co-production, I would say. It's taken some time, only meeting monthly, although we have had some meetings in between that. But it goes to show, you know, it does take time, but it does deliver at the end. And hopefully for the borough, you know, this will make a big difference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Florian, you've been a councillor that's been very involved in this. Would you like to add anything to the officers' reports?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to second everything that's been said around the quality and the amount of work that's been done there on this report. So I wanted to go back to, you know, I think no one could have expected the big bang of digitalization the pandemic brought. We all lived through it, we all remember it, and it just forwarded society by 10 years. I wanted to touch on some of the things that have happened since you would have last heard from this. Twitter became X. You'll know this. Younger persons now tend to hang out in the metaverse. But like with any technology, we can also see the worst develop. So cyber flashing has become a crime, and we've seen the first instances of rape in the metaverse. Now, you will have heard Mark Carney today talk about, I didn't have him as a radical socialist, by the way, but you'll have heard him today talk about what happened in the last year, in fact, a year ago, and the crash that the mini budget brought along. Since you last spoke about this policy paper, estimates are that about 1 million people lost access to the internet. Since then, people who have had to revise their budgets and have cut on one thing, which is access to broadband. So that's digital exclusion. That's why what we're talking about tonight is so important. I'll talk about the pace of digital regulation too. Obviously, tomorrow, the laws will look at the online safety bill one final time, and we hope that it'll get royal assent to better protect people in this country online. We've been outpaced by our neighbours. Europe has already passed DSA, DMA regulation, but look at what this council has done. And it's to have started now many years ago on that, just at the outcome of the pandemic, to have thought, okay, we've all moved online. Now, what was good about it? What was bad about it? And how do we prepare tomorrow as well? And that's very visionary. It is testament to the people who were here before us, all the officers who have been working on that ever since. It's just very inspiring. I really want to attest to the quality of the work that's going in the digital accessibility group. It's really inspiring to see residents. Again, I'll give you an estimate of why this methodology is the right one by giving you an example of how central government has been developing digital policy. And that is about something that I work on, which is around digital identity. That's something that everyone now can use to prove their identity, right to work, right to live in the UK. And that's a fantastic thing, isn't it? However, let's look at how policy was delivered. A first version of that was introduced in roughly early 2021. Some services, you'll be familiar with it, you can evidence right to work for some of our council employees using digital service providers, went live in the summer of 21. The first public engagement sessions took place this summer. That's a year and a half ago. After policy was developed, after people in Whitehall went and thought, what do people want, that they submitted to people. What we do at H&F is we put people first. I've been in those DAGs meetings. We're looking at how that service that isn't live yet will work. People are testing things that are being put front and center of things that aren't live yet. We're getting their feedback first and making sure that it works for them from day one. So yeah, I really want to say, look, also it's something that's very current. The House of Lords, in fact, published a report in June calling on the government to publish a digital accessibility and inclusion strategy. We have that in H&F. Look how ahead of time we are. So I really want to commend all the hard work that's been done, obviously as lead member for digital innovation. And I know the cabinet member has said to me that we will both be by your side and working really, really hard to turn this from a paper into a reality. So thank you for all your work, and I'm thankful for the committee's time and consideration of this item again.
Thank you for that. I think that's put it in a really useful context, actually. And it's certainly when we looked at this 18 months ago, I think in the first instance, almost 18 months ago, that was the way that I think I saw it as chair, which I thought it was a good subject to bring here because it had to be co-produced. It had to be done with people. And I think we've managed to get that. There's probably a few tweaks before Councillor Reid takes it through cabinet, which is one of my questions, kind of given an indication on time. And obviously, this is not something we've got to put in statute, but it is good to have a document, and it's probably going to have to be a document that's constantly updated, because in terms of the digital world, things move on so quickly. So it's going to have to be refreshed quite frequently. But I just wondered what the time scale is roughly now. You kind of indicated that it was going back to residents and the digital accessibility group in October. But when do you think we might be seeing this at cabinet? Because I think this is potentially our last chance to chip in. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it is potentially your last chance to chip in, because I think we're hoping for it to go to cabinet directly after we've gone to the DAG group again. So hoping to finalise and then get to cabinet as soon as possible.
And can I also ask, you sort of talked about how we're going to measure outcomes. Can I just sort of poke on that one a little bit more and sort of how do you envisage we're going to measure outcomes? And I think in the previous report, Councillor Perez talked about kind of completely sort of excluded or underrepresented groups. And I think this is an area where there are certain community groups which are quite hard to reach on digital as well. So just maybe a little bit of comment on that.
Yeah, I think that's where we need to do quite a bit more work on measuring outcomes on each of the objectives. And I think they'll be measured in different ways depending what the objective is. I think one of the key areas is that we want to have the data to back up what we're doing. So I think there's some work on developing data sources and then measuring how what we do changes the results of those data. So I think that's one of our next stages that we need to really work with the voluntary and community sector on as well, because they have got some data that we haven't got access to. So we need to work together on how we measure the outcomes and how we see the improvements to the work we're doing.
Thanks. Members of the committee, Councillor Perez. Councillor Perez first. Well, I saw you first. Everybody will get their opportunity.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And thank you very much for this update. It's really good as well and encouraging to see what we're doing and how we are leading in this initiative. I just have a couple of questions. So in relation to information, advice and guidance, are we also going to be supporting our residents when it comes to social welfare advice or access to welfare benefits? I know that accessing, for example, online platforms to apply for universal credit is a massive challenge for some communities and some individuals. Are we also going to be supporting that process, bridging that process? Because if you think about universal credit, it's a benefit that is essential in terms of covering people's essential needs. And the other question that I have is in relation to access to Wi-Fi. Fantastic. Work with libraries, fantastic. But what about safeguarding when it comes to the younger ones? So have we got systems in place to make sure that children are not exposed to, for example, platforms like Snapchat, TikTok, who may not be appropriate for the little ones? Thank you.
Welfare one. Shall I go first? Or you? So in terms of access to welfare benefits and cost of living support generally, we are as part of the Cost of Living Alliance looking at a platform at the moment to be able to signpost to different benefits and different voluntary and community sector organisations that can provide support. Which links in really nicely to this because we're looking at using a similar mechanism for digital inclusion. Seems a bit weird, I guess, that we're looking at a digital platform to deliver advice as to where you get digital inclusion support, but it's really for officers as well as the public in terms of knowing where to signpost people to the relevant support and who is delivering what and what is available within the community. In terms of supporting people with access to welfare benefits, and you mentioned universal credit is purely online application, as is, some of our benefits in terms of house benefits has been online for some time as well. We do offer support through our face-to-face provision in terms of assisted service and also through the various welfare support teams that there are in the council. So there's one team that specifically works with council tenants and another team that specifically works with private tenants that will support people with all their welfare benefit needs. So that was my bit. Are you okay to do the next bit, Tina?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Perez. On online safety, I think actually the safety issue is not just for children. I think it's about feeling safe regardless of your age or your experience level. So on the advice and guidance issue. And I think also when we're working with third-party providers who are providing access to devices, skills, or connectivity, we will need to build that in and make sure that there's a clear offer for every group. So for children, yes, it's about making sure that they're trained to be safe online. And I think it's also about partnering up with providers that are already doing work in this area. So schools, for example, are always pushing out messages. So if we're not doing anything ourselves, it's about signposting to the areas where you can get trusted sources of advice or ideas about what you need to have in place, maybe as a parent, to make sure that your children are safe. Thank you.
Councillor Daly.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think I'm very much guilty of frequently thinking of digital inclusion and exclusion as a binary, you're in or you're out. And in this forum, I'm minded that some of the things that we're talking about here put us all on a bit of a spectrum. So there is a place where we all end up being somewhat digitally excluded. You know, Councillor Chevalier was talking about ID, like digital ID, ideas of voting, benefits, banking. There's always a point at which, you know, that kind of security question lies, I suppose. And Tina, you and I have some very recent history in kind of the idea of accessibility versus security. And I'm thinking very much about the single sign-ons we're talking about, and making the website here be more user-friendly and more available to everybody. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit to any vulnerabilities and security that sort of opens, and what that balance is that you're looking at. Because when you're talking about benefits or voter ID or banking, any of that, or indeed just having your calendar on your mobile phone, it turns out, security is paramount, and there's always somebody trying to hack into that information. I just wonder if you could speak to that for a moment.
So are you talking just generally with respect to digital inclusion, or more widely across the council?
Well, I'm thinking you were talking in particular about having single sign-ons and including more people, making the website itself more digitally inclusive, so further along that spectrum for people. So I just wondered what that balance was.
So I think when we put in place single sign-on, we still provide the same protections that we have in place to our various systems. So every time we procure access to a system, whether it's the website hosting platform or it's to a third-party platform that we're giving single sign-on access to, we always make sure that we vet those suppliers to check what their security controls are. Obviously, the public has a role to play in terms of the passwords that they are choosing to put in place to obtain access to our systems, but there's still layers in terms of what a member of the public can access, which is what we make publicly available or publicly accessible via my account, versus our own council systems. I'm not sure if that addresses the question, but I think there needs to be an education piece around that as well.
Yeah, so you're saying that actually you are quite comfortable with making it simpler, making the website all a bit easier to access and a bit more intuitive and easier to navigate, and we can start bringing some of those services together.
So I would say that, yes, I think it's not always a security question. I think in terms of access to the systems, I'm not sure I understand your question completely, but if you're talking about what's publicly accessible on the website, that's already in the public domain, and I think it's more a question of user, design, and that's something that with REAP we're very much working on.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Toulouse.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a few questions. Feel free to get me to stop if I monopolize the conversation. On page 57, I about access to devices and throughout actually, there's a lot of talk about working with the Good Things Foundation to provide access to the devices. I'm just wondering exactly how this scheme works. If I'm a resident and I need a device, who do I go to? Presumably not to the Good Things Foundation, but how would that work exactly?
So there's two parts. There's one is to get access to devices from Good Things Foundation. You're right, a resident wouldn't go to them. What we'll work on is a referral pathway, whether it be through libraries or through revenue and benefits, housing, social care, certain key departments that actually they will proactively identify someone who made a device, or vice versa, someone may openly say, I need a device. So that referral pathway, which is what we're still working on, but theoretically will be through libraries. So once that referral comes through and it's vetted, a resident will be asked to attend their local library to collect that device. They may be then given advice as to how to use that advice. It's still work in progress, but that looks like the pathway that we'll look to take. So it will be administered by LBHF, albeit the devices will be provided by the Good Things Foundation and perhaps any other social initiative that's going on. So that's one example. There's others that we'll explore as part of the plan.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds very good. I'm just worried that for many people, well, first of all, they may not know that the resource of the library is there and that this is what they'll do. I wonder if, especially when we talk about older people, adult social care, which will be the people seeing that. And again, looking back to my work with Ready to Say Go, the people who would come to us and would make a referral who would be our own council officers from adult social care who, knew these people and knew exactly what they needed, or would be, a teacher if it was a younger person. My fear would be that as good a resource as the library may be, that it just adds an extra hurdle for many people. And also always a problem was for us, and you mentioned there that, there will be some vetting. There's always the question of what the vetting is and, what is it asking? Are we looking for whether someone claims benefits or not? There's always a danger that people will fall through the cracks the more criteria we start adding. I understand it's early in the process, but I just, need to say that, I guess. Just on the Good Things Foundation, are we also, as a council, I don't think there's a mention in the report, will we be doing anything with our own devices to donate to their own national device bank? Because, we have quite a book turnover of devices.
So yes, the plan is that we're planning a device refresh for our corporate laptops for next financial year. And the plan is that we will donate all of our reusable devices to the Good Things Foundation so that they can be repurposed, and we'll have that measure in place going forward with all our devices.
Okay, thank you. That's very good to hear. Would you like to move on away from me, or can I ask 15 more questions?
You can ask a couple more questions.
Okay, fair.
You have a couple more.
Back to the libraries. I mean, when we had the meeting last year, I think we're all in agreement because it was mentioned that the Wi-Fi is not free, and we're all in agreement that this is something that perhaps should be looked at quickly. And I still see here that it says that there will be work with the libraries to explore offering the free access to the internet. And I was just wondering if we're still in the exploring phase, or, if it's something we can offer, or, if we found out that it's not a problem after all.
So, yes, we've explored. Actually, Wi-Fi is free in libraries. It's the second hour when you use a desktop PC in libraries that isn't currently. So currently, I know libraries are looking at what changes, if they make that free, what impact that will have on revenue. So there's some work to be done on that aspect of things. So we're right at the good time now, because it's the time when these things are being reviewed. So hopefully in the next kind of 2 or 3 weeks, I mean, we've said to libraries, this is like a key thing to deliver if we want to be able to, have digital inclusion. Libraries are the hub of communities. We think it's something good. Of course, there's financial constraints, but an impact there on revenue generated. Something I'm not sure if I mentioned specifically in the report, but also printing is something that came up from residents and having access to being able to print too, which is, I think, chargeable now, but will be free shortly in libraries. I have to ask colleagues, so please don't quote me on that. I'll come back and feedback on that. But there is certainly, I know we referenced it back in December, but of course it's taken a bit of time to come to fruition just with budget setting, et cetera, and how that then impacts on everything else. But as you can see, the immediate action is to pick that up, which we already have.
Lovely, thank you. And then just moving on to the strategy itself, I agree with Councillor Homan's comments about, you know, having the data to back some of the vision, for example, that by 2025 will be a more digitally inclusive borough. It would be good to have, you know, something to, you know, explain what this means in practice. Can I just make a comment which is more about semantic more than anything, and the skills, for example, and maybe at other points, the term the elderly is used, which, you know, I've found out through this work that the sector has moved on to use older people instead. So perhaps it's something we can look at. But anyway, it's something more substantive. I saw on, where was it in a report, the Lottie map, areas likely to experience high levels of exclusion, which seems to me the pattern I could see was that these are areas where we have a lot of shelter housing and all shelter housing and care homes, perhaps, although it's not 100% a tautology. But the question I have is, with our shelter housing, do we offer any provision of Wi-Fi in those you know, buildings or blocks, or any sort of way to assist all the residents? Sorry, all the residents, as I just should have corrected myself.
I was going to say I'm not personally sure, but I can see Councillor Homan nodding her head, and I believe the answer is yes.
Yes, the answer is yes. Quite a number of the sheltered housing schemes were some of the first to benefit from getting free Wi-Fi, but it's generally the halls rather than every single property. But on the back of that point, I was going to ask the question, at the very, very first meeting, we had community fibre and hyperoptic come along and talk to us. And we did raise this point about making it more widely known that they do offer the social tariffs. And obviously that's something that was mentioned in terms of what the government might be trying to achieve. And I know we're trying to promote it, but have they stepped up on that locally in the borough? Would you say that the two main providers, I mean, they're trampling down everybody's streets, digging up the pavements, putting the cables in. So, I mean, are they actually, you know, standing up and being counted in terms of making sure that that's promoted better?
So I'd say yes, we added some text to our website a good few months ago now. As I said earlier, we've got a meeting, or colleagues in economy have a meeting with both of those companies towards the end of the month around looking how to expand Wi-Fi in some additional community centres, where else in the borough that we can look at. So it's certainly work to take forward to bring them back to the table. I'd say there was a bit of a gap for whatever reason as to why that hasn't happened yet, but it's again one of the immediate actions that we've got in place. So hopefully next time, by the time we come back to next Policy and Oversight Board, there'll be an even bigger uptake in council buildings, care homes, etc., with access to Wi-Fi.
What would be really helpful, I think, if at some point it could be circulated, like not tomorrow, but at some point, a list of, for example, the sheltered housing schemes that are connected up. I know quite a lot of them are, whether they all are, I don't know, but and any community halls and things like that where we know that they're wired up, it would be just really useful for the committee to know, I think, how extensively we've achieved that already and how much further we need to go.
Yeah, I'll take that away and get that to board.
Any Councillor Vaughan? Sorry, Councillor Selous, had you finished? Yeah, okay. Councillor Vaughan.
Thanks, Chair. So, I mean, really sort of more by way of comments than necessarily some questions, but thank you for all the work. It's an extremely comprehensive action plan, I think, that's come out of it. I'm glad to hear there's been so much work with the digital accessibility group. It's clearly informed what is, you know, a series of priorities. I like the idea of the themes that have come out of that. I'd certainly echo, I mean, the point that you made and others have made about getting some data so we know where we're starting from and where we're going to. So in, you know, 12, 18, 24 months time, we've got a good picture of how things have moved along and how the improvements have been made by way of this. Agree as well that probably some member involvement is going to be needed on the sort of governance side. I mean, there's going to be a range, but particularly where it comes to sort of prioritising some of these, because clearly there's a lot of things to do here, and some are going to go sort of hopefully very well and swimmingly, and others won't sort of go quite as well. And you're going to have to prioritise a bit further down the line as to which ones to push on and which ones to, you know, you can hold back on a little bit. So I think you'll probably need some input and direction, possibly coming back to this board in due course, but also from members, Florian and Councillor Ree and others, I guess. So I think that makes a lot of sense because obviously this is a big programme that you're planning to roll out, and of course it's going to take some time to do, and there will be sort of pitfalls, and yeah, there'll be great successes hopefully, and there'll be some things that don't go as well. But I think, I mean, I'd really say very keen to see you get on with a lot of this stuff. Improving accessibility, making the website easier to navigate. I mean, unfortunately, there's too many things really to talk about all in one go, but I think it looks pretty ambitious at the moment. And I like the fact there seems to be a sort of early set of, well, there seems to be a green coloured chart of like 24 things to do, and then there's a sort of further action plan to do after that. So it looks like there's a lot set there, and clearly I'm glad to see the sort of what seems to be more immediate actions and then ones that will perhaps come on stream over time. It looks like a really exciting programme of work to get through. And clearly, I'm sure that Councillor Ree's been looking at the costings of it all and stuff, and working with you, but looking forward to you taking it to the Cabinet and sort of driving it forward, and then we can see exactly how it's working in 12 or 18 months' time.
Any further questions? Yes, Sobus would like to make a comment or a contribution.
Right. I just some observation in terms of exclusion and what inclusion means. I remember a few years ago going down to Age UK and talking to some people, and there was digital inclusion, and some of the older people said, "Look, I'm too old to be starting to learn this. All I want is be around with my mates, go out, in social activities." And I think one of the things is by rolling out this, I think we need to be aware of the kind of people who fall through the gaps, people who don't want to, people who have disabilities, people with learning disabilities. There are large groups in society who will not be able to go. And we haven't even started talking about AI. We're talking the dangers, the real benefits to AI, no doubts about it, but there are also real dangers in terms of, we're talking about security, we're talking about, the safety of people. And scammers are constantly, you hear about older people being scammed. But the other concern is young people living in a virtual world. So, digital inclusion also means we're dehumanizing ourselves. And I think this is kind of my personal observation, and just getting it from, I'm involved quite a lot in mental health work and the increasing mental health challenges that young people are facing, and and it's university students as well, not just school students. So I think there are there's positiveness, and we want to be, but we are also in that process making less and less human contact, and there are consequences of doing that. And we're just seeing it from our work, working with lots and lots of communities. So I think, that this needs to be given some thought in terms of how we don't end up in a situation where you've got fantastic online system where a lot of people don't engage. Personally, I believe, every home should have given a basic access to internet. It should be because it's such everything now is done online, but we mustn't forget those people who can't access online. So that's all I want to say in terms of observations, and some really good discussions, but there's areas we're not. I mean, I've come across someone who has a AI friend, and they go and chat to them. So, and that the danger is people will have those virtual friends rather than the real human friends. And I think the implications for all of us in society that happens. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think the point you're making about internet being a universal right to have access to the internet is, it should be, people, it's really difficult to function now. And I think maybe the comments you're making about the pitfalls as well, it's kind of part of the online safety thing, but I'm sure there's not one of us in this room that doesn't walk down the street and pass 50-60% of people who are walking along looking at their phones, probably risking their lives by not looking at where they're going when they're crossing the road and things like that. So it is a really, really big issue. And I think the dehumanization part is a very valid point. Not sure what we should do about that in our digital strategy, but it's a point possibly we need to, make reference to going forward. So thank you for that contribution. Florian? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to come back on some of the points that were raised by members and officers and attendees. And thank you for your contribution. I think it's very important. I think in looking at this digital strategy, you're looking at a paper that goes side by side and hand in hand with an in-person provision of services still and always, right? We're not talking about moving everything online and that's it forever and there'll be no more human contact. You're right. Actually, I know I have residents who don't want computers. They want to stay off the grid and actually enjoy going to the library, say hello to the library and meet some of the people who go there as well. It's an aspect of socialization. Ironically, they go to a computer to see people and hang out with them. So I think it's a very important what you said. Some of the AI is like, guns and knives and all sorts of inventions. We can do the best with them, well, hardly with guns, but we can also do the worst. And some of the things that we've been trialing are really exciting. I'll give you an example of an AI generated text machine that helps people navigate the deratization anti-pest service, basically. And that's something you may not know, don't all go now because you'll overload the website, but we're trialing it, and we're trialing it as a way to make sure that people who don't really understand how things work can actually go in there, type a question, I've got a rat infestation in my house, how can you help? And everything's provided to them instantly. So, and it's really exciting actually coming from your team, the BI team, doing some really, really good things. We talked about the online safety element. Obviously, finally, regulation is catching up. This feeling of having just no way to protect our children and vulnerable people online, hopefully should end. But you, Councillor Perez, mentioned about how often do we review it? How do we look at it? I mean, for online safety nationally, they expect to have to review the law each year because technology moves so fast and in directions that we can't expect that we need to revisit. So I expect that, you'll see more of this team in the coming months and years because we just need to constantly reevaluate it. You talked about safety as well. My experience of residents when we talk to them online is, well, the second I connect, someone will scam me, steal my identity, steal all my money, and I'll be out on the street. So it's a lot of communication for us to do. It's a lot of, you're all familiar with when we help with energy vouchers, when people were telling us that they were scams, where in fact they were real because they weren't even trusting official letters. We talked about the provision of devices, and I think it's important. You've also, Councillor Daly, you've said about we're all on a spectrum really of digital skill, and it's very true. Provision of devices, actually in the UK, 93% of people have mobile phones or devices, but we find that multiple millions, it's around 2.7 million people can't have a device but can't open a browser. 5 million people who are employed can't perform basic tasks online, such as filling out a form. So it's what you've talked about tonight. It's what the strategy does. It's not just here's a computer. It's also giving people the lifelong skills to know how to use it, to know how to adapt. And that's what's great in this strategy is it's holistic. It looks at a resident's whole digital life from the beginning up until the point that they become an expert. And that's really, really important. We also talked about the one login aspect. Well, that the idea is to provide residents with just everything in one place. That's the main idea. And we've seen some prototypes in the DAG, and if you ever want to come along, you're very welcome. And it's really looking exciting. Some of the stuff, Councillor Vaughan, you asked about, it's really ambition, the website big. I'll give you an example of what's coming. So sorry if I leak it early. It's a website that automatically translates all of its content in the 20+ languages that are spoken the most in London. That's just really exciting because you see this council push and pioneer in a way that just doesn't happen elsewhere nationally. We're still waiting for National to do its work on a number of things. But we're pioneering so hard here in Nation F, and I'm very proud of that. So thank you again for your time and consideration tonight.
Thank you. Any final comments from anybody before I conclude this item? Yes, Jazz.
So I just wanted to ask a question around assistive technology. And is there a drive for older people, you know, the promotion of this assistive technology for older people at home? Thank you.
So I had a meeting with colleagues in social care about this earlier, and they were saying there will be. So there currently is. We've probably got, I'd say, the best person in London who pushes technology-enabled care. I know there's still a lot of more work to do. So there's things like the digital switchover for 2025. If you're aware, so analog to digital, that brings with it its own issues. I know there's work at looking at certain care homes to enable that provision. As my colleague said to me earlier, though, there is an element of Big Brother looking over you and that kind of consideration of older adults. So I know in my previous role in another council, literally doing this work, people in care homes saying that exact same thing to me. I don't want to be monitored. I don't want a blood sensor on me. I don't want a falls detector on me. You know, so yes, I think certainly as a council, I genuinely think when I was in my previous council, looking in, thought this was the place to be, and now I'm here, I can see that. There is work going on. There will be work to join that up with Julius and other colleagues, but it is definitely something that we're looking at. But again, uptake is something that we need to consider.
And I think also around assistive technology in day centres, we're very much left to devise our own IT systems. And so we're not connected to the local authority or anybody else. And it'd be really good to, at some point, explore how we use assistive technology in day centres as well. Thank you.
I'm going to throw in a suggestion from what you've just raised. I was going to say, it sounds like it's kind of is part of this, but it's slightly different because it's obviously pretty much adult social care in terms of supporting people in that way. But I was going to say, this sounds like an issue very much for co-production. So we will take that away as a point for adult social care, I think, and explore how they are developing that in partnership with voluntary sector and with users. So it's definitely an action point we can take from the meeting. Councillor Perez.
No, absolutely. I think that suggestion is really good. We can probably bring it to the Health and Social Care Policy Accountability Committee as an agenda item, and we can focus on that.
That's one of the benefits of having the chairs from all of the policy and accountability committees on this committee is they can pick up ideas that come up here and take them to their committees. So sounds like we might have a commitment from Councillor Perez there to look at it at her committee, but it might take a little while to get there, but we'll certainly take that one away. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, any final comments? I think that there are a number of sort of actions, probably not big actions, but some actions, and certainly having that information about where's wired in terms of the community halls and housing, sheltered housing schemes, etc. So I think the measurements and the outcomes, I think it would be really nice if we have sort of some report back way after this has gone to cabinet, when you've actually started implementing everything, to see that all of this work that's gone on, that we are actually achieving what we set out to achieve. And then maybe we can throw a few more suggestions in at that stage as to how you might be driving it one way or the other. So thank you very much for coming along again. But I think probably not for about a year, but I think we will come back to it to see how it is getting on once it gets to the implementation stage. And I think also to say that this was one of the first reports the committee looked at. So it is kind of made a contribution to developing how you go forward on that. And we just started, first time we looked at intergenerational was tonight. So that's at very, very early stages. They don't even have a kind of like much of a draft strategy yet. So we're at very early stages of that. And I like to think that the conversations we have along the way is contributing to us being a better council in the way that we do things and deliver services for local residents. So thank you very much for coming along. And we'll see you again at some point. Thank you. Okay, I am now just going to whiz through the rest of the agenda. So the next item is the summaries that have been submitted from the policy and accountability committees. Are there any comments from any of the chairs that you particularly wanted to draw our attention to from your committee? You look like you're all being very busy, and Councillor Perez has now got something to go off and do, obviously. Is there any comments anybody wants to make? Nope. So are they noted? There's no question. You don't want to ask any questions about anybody else's reports or whatever. Okay. Thank you very much. That leaves me to the final item, which is the work programme. Where am I on here? Hang on, got to find the draft work programme. We had the Youth Council here earlier, and they are actually doing a very major piece of work at the moment, which they are, I think, hoping to present in December. And I thought it would be really good if we had them here to this board to talk through the themes in their manifesto and the policy development work they're doing, because we're asking young people to make a contribution to the council. And I know they do go to the Children's Services Pack and just give a sort of report about what they're up to. But if we really want to take the Youth Council seriously, we need to try and encompass wherever we can in the policy work that this board does. So I've invited them to come along because it's quite timely for them to come in December. So that's probably the main item for December. The other items that I thought was quite appropriate is Cabinet have just approved or due to approve a fuel poverty strategy. We're obviously in the beginning of the winter, so some of that should have started to have an impact, and it relates very much to cost of living, which we've also covered at this committee, so we could encompass a update on how we are doing in terms of our objectives and cost of living. So that's the kind of two items that I've highlighted for December, and the other ones are still very good items. Not quite sure when we're going to do them all. We mentioned third sector grants tonight. We heard that we're halfway through the programme, so that's going to be quite a big piece of work in terms of how we want to structure how we give grants when the programme comes to an end. And we talked quite a lot today about, intergenerational work. Do we want to make that as a theme of how we award grants? What other themes do we want to make? So I think that's a big strategic thing, and it's a big thing for us in terms of what we expect from voluntary sector. So just a few ideas there. So I'll just really think I want to ask the committee to note those items and obviously open to any other suggestions that come up through your boards or otherwise. So I think our AI came up tonight. I think that's quite an interesting one. Maybe we want to look at that at some point in the future as well. So is everybody happy with the proposed work programme? Yep. Okay, great. The next meeting will be on the 11th of December. So thank you very much for attending and for your contributions tonight. Thanks.